Before there were cities, names, borders, or history, there was no creature trying to become human. Our ancient ancestors did not know they were part of a great journey. They only tried to stay warm, find food, protect children, and survive one more night. Yet, across millions of years, small changes gathered silently in bone, muscle, memory, and mind. No one planned us, no one saw the destination. And still, something slowly became capable of asking where it came from. If human evolution had no goal, then when did the human story truly begin? Before there were modern humans, there was no human story waiting to be told. There was no clear beginning that the earth itself could recognize, no line on the ground where an animal crossed over and became something called us. For a very long time, the world was simply the world. Forests grew and vanished. Grasslands widened and shrank. Rivers changed their courses. Ice came and retreated. Animals adapted, moved, disappeared, or left descendants behind. Among them were small primates, ancient apes, and later, distant relatives of the human line. They did not stand beneath the sky with a future in mind. They did not carry the idea of progress. They were not incomplete people. They were living creatures, fitted imperfectly to the needs of their own time. This is where a calm story of evolution must begin, not with a proud arrival, but with a quiet correction. Evolution was not trying to make modern humans. It had no plan to create hands that could write, voices that could ask questions, or minds that could remember childhood. It worked only through survival, reproduction, chance, inheritance, and the pressure of changing places. Some traits lasted because they helped enough. Some vanished because they did not. Many lives left no trace at all. When we look backward from modern humans to ancient ancestors, it is easy to imagine a road leading directly to us. But that road did not exist for those who lived it. There were only bodies in landscapes, mothers carrying young, groups searching for food, eyes watching the edge of trees, feet touching soil, and nights that had to be endured. The origin of modern humans is not a straight staircase rising upward. It is more like a wide river system, with branches, dead ends, crossings, and slow currents moving through deep time. Long before Homo sapiens appeared, there were older forms in the human family, and before them, still older ancestors whose lives were closer to other apes than to any person we would recognize today. Their bones, when found, do not tell a simple story of victory. They tell us that change was uneven. A jaw could become slightly different. A pelvis could carry weight in a new way. Teeth could reflect a changing diet. A skull could hold a brain that was still small by modern standards, yet already part of a living body that had to solve the problems of its own day. These were not symbols of destiny. They were ordinary biological details, made important only because time kept passing. To understand the journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, we have to loosen our grip on the idea that we were always the destination. For most of life's history, nothing like a human mind existed. Even after the first members of our wider lineage appeared in Africa, they were only one small part of a much larger living world. Large cats hunted, herds moved across open land, birds nested, insects fed in the soil, plants shaped what animals could eat and where they could travel. Climate shifts opened some paths and closed others. Our ancestors had no special protection from this world. Their origin was not separate from weather, hunger, predators, disease, birth, injury, and loss. The human line began inside nature, not above it. That point matters because it keeps the story honest. If we begin with modern humans and look backward, everything can seem arranged for our arrival. But if we begin in the ancient world itself, the picture becomes quieter and colder. There were only generations, each one living without knowing what would come after it. A small advantage might matter. A slightly better way of moving, holding, seeing, remembering, or staying with others might carry forward. Yet no single generation would have looked complete or unfinished. Each was simply alive. The deep origin of modern humans is therefore not a dramatic moment. It is the slow accumulation of many small inheritances, passing through bodies that never knew they were part of a long story. Somewhere in that great distance, the materials of our later life began to gather: upright posture, flexible hands, social attention, memory, care, and the ability to learn from the living world. But in this first part of the journey, they remain only beginnings, scattered through time, not yet forming the creature that would one day look back and ask what it was. For the ancient ancestors of the human line, life was not shaped by large ideas. It was shaped by needs that returned every day. Food had to be found before strength faded. Water had to be reached before the body weakened. Young had to be carried, watched, fed, and kept close enough to survive. A safe place had to be chosen before darkness made the land harder to read. Warmth mattered, shade mattered, distance mattered. The smell of another animal, the movement of grass, the sound of birds suddenly rising, the change of wind on the skin, all of these small signals could become important. Long before modern humans had language, tools of many kinds, or stories about where they came from, their distant ancestors lived inside this simple pressure. They did not need to understand evolution. They needed to get through the day. This is one of the coldest truths in the calm story of human evolution. The deep roots of humanity were not noble or planned. They were bodily, ordinary, and often fragile. Hunger did not wait for intelligence to become great. Cold did not care whether a creature had a future. A predator did not see a future human in a smaller, weaker animal moving near the edge of a clearing. The world did not protect our ancestors because of what their descendants might become. Their bodies had to work well enough in the present, or their line might end there. When we speak of ancient ancestors, we are not speaking of modern people in rougher bodies. We are speaking of living primates and early hominins whose minds were tuned to immediate problems: what can be eaten, what must be avoided, where the young are, who is nearby, and whether the next place is safer than this one. The origin of modern humans is hidden inside these repeated acts: a hand reaching, a mother holding, a group staying close, a body remembering a path back to water, a face noticing fear in another face. None of these actions needed to look dramatic, yet over many generations, the line that would one day lead toward modern humans was shaped by such moments. Survival was not only about strength, it was also about timing, attention, and the ability to remain connected to a living environment. In ancient African landscapes, where many important early human relatives are known from fossil evidence, changing habitats meant that no single way of life could remain perfect forever. Wooded areas, open grasslands, wetlands, and mixed environments offered different risks and different foods. Some creatures adapted in one direction, others in another. The human line did not rise above this process. It was part of it. A body that could move through varied ground, reach for different foods, carry something useful, or remain alert near others might have a small advantage. But that advantage would not feel like progress to the creature living it. It would feel like one more day survived. The distance between ancient ancestors and modern humans can make us forget how quiet the beginning was. We are used to thinking of humanity through speech, memory, culture, art, and moral questions. But before all of that, there were bodies managing heat, hunger, fear, pain, birth, and sleep. Even care itself began in a deeply physical world. Young primates are vulnerable for a long time compared with many other animals. They need protection, milk, warmth, and learning. A mother who stayed attentive, a nearby group that reduced danger, a familiar place that offered shelter, all of these could affect who lived long enough to grow. In that sense, the human story did not begin only with brain size or tool-making. It also began with dependency. It began with the fact that a young body could not survive alone. This matters because modern humans still carry the traces of that origin. Our need for warmth, safety, closeness, rhythm, food, sleep, and recognition did not appear after civilization. They are older than cities, older than writing, older than any name for being human. The calm evolution story is not only a story of becoming smarter, it is a story of remaining alive long enough for small inherited changes and learned behaviors to accumulate. Each generation faced the world without knowing it was preserving a future. A child that survived could become a parent. A path remembered could be used again. A danger noticed in time could leave one more descendant. Slowly, through countless ordinary struggles, the raw conditions of being alive became the ground from which later humanity would grow. And still, at this stage, there was no modern human standing at the end of the path, only ancient lives moving through weather, hunger, care, and fear, carrying forward pieces of a story they could never see. Evolution is often misunderstood because modern humans like stories with direction. We look at a small, ancient ancestor, then at a person standing upright today, and the mind quietly draws a line between them. It feels natural to imagine improvement, as if each generation moved one step closer to speech, memory, art, and self-awareness. But the real process was colder and slower than that. Evolution does not choose a final shape. It has no picture of a future body. It does not know what a hand might someday make, what a voice might someday say, or what a mind might someday wonder. It only works through variation, inheritance, survival, reproduction, and the changing conditions around living things. In every generation, some individuals were born with slight differences. Many differences did not matter. Some were harmful. A few could help, but only in a particular place, under particular pressures, during a particular stretch of time. A trait that helped in one environment might be useless in another. A body that survived a dry season might fail in a colder one. A way of moving, eating, watching, or staying close to others might give a small advantage, but no creature living inside that advantage would understand it as part of a journey toward modern humans. This is why the origin of humanity must be held gently. The changes that led from ancient ancestors to modern humans were not steps on a ladder. They were small biological and behavioral shifts filtered through deep time. Bones changed slowly. Teeth changed with diets. Legs, hips, feet, hands, shoulders, and skulls carried traces of many pressures, not one single purpose. A slightly different pelvis might affect movement. A slightly different hand might make holding and carrying more useful. A slightly longer childhood might allow more learning, but also require more care. None of these things alone created humanity. Each belonged first to a living creature trying to survive its own world. Over many generations, such traits could be preserved, combined, changed again, or lost. The story becomes difficult to see because time is so large that small changes disappear from imagination. A single life looks brief. A single generation looks almost still, but across hundreds of thousands, then millions of years, tiny differences can gather into bodies that no earlier ancestor would have recognized. This is one of the quiet truths behind the title of this story. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was real, but it was not visible to those walking it. It was not a road. It was inheritance passing through life after life. Fossils help us see fragments of that passage, but fossils are not complete biographies. A jaw, a tooth, a skull, a stone tool, or a footprint can suggest something important, yet it cannot give us every feeling, every sound, every choice, or every lost day. The honest story of human evolution has to accept both what evidence can show and what it cannot. We can say that the human line emerged among other primates, especially in Africa, and that over millions of years many related forms lived, changed, spread, and disappeared. We can say that modern humans are part of this branching history, not separate from it. But we should not turn every fossil into a direct step toward ourselves, because evolution often branches, experiments, and ends. Some relatives of the human line left no descendants. Some lived alongside others. Some were close to us, yet not us. This makes the story less simple, but more truthful. It means that becoming modern was not guaranteed. It depended on bodies, meeting landscapes, climates changing, groups enduring, children surviving, and useful traits being carried forward without anyone knowing why. In this first truk, the most important idea is not that humans became special, but that the beginning was ordinary. Ancient ancestors were not waiting to become modern. They lived through hunger, weather, injury, birth, fear, and rest. They moved through places that demanded attention. They inherited bodies shaped by those who came before and passed on whatever life allowed them to pass on. The calm evolution story begins here, with no trumpet, no sudden awakening, and no promise. Only time, life, and change, gathering slowly in the dark behind the human name. The body came before the idea of being human, long before modern people could explain ancestry, draw family trees, or wonder about evolution. Ancient bodies were already being shaped by the practical demands of living. A body had to move across uneven ground. It had to reach food, chew it, digest it, rest, heal, and protect its young. It had to manage heat under the sun and cold after dark. It had to spend energy carefully, because every movement had a cost. In this part of the human story, the body was not a symbol of progress. It was a working arrangement between life and place. Our ancient ancestors did not change because the future needed modern humans. They changed because certain forms, habits, and inherited traits helped some individuals survive a little better in the environments they actually faced. The landscapes connected to early human evolution were not one fixed background. Across long stretches of time, parts of Africa shifted between wetter and drier periods. Forests, woodlands, grasslands, lakesides, and mixed habitats expanded or retreated. Food was not always in one place. Safety was not always nearby. A creature that could only live in one narrow way might struggle when the land changed around it. This does not mean our ancestors were superior to other animals. It means their bodies were caught in a changing world, like every other living creature. The human line began not as a triumph, but as a series of adjustments. Teeth and jaws reflected what could be eaten. Limbs reflected how bodies moved. Hands and shoulders reflected climbing, reaching, carrying, and later, more precise forms of handling. Feet and hips reflected the growing importance of moving on two legs. None of these changes happened all at once. None of them made an early ancestor fully human. Each change belonged first to a creature that still had to wake, search, avoid danger, and sleep again. When we look at the body of a modern human, it is easy to see it as normal, as if this shape had always been waiting. But the modern body is a record of compromises. Walking upright freed the hands in useful ways, but it also placed weight differently through the spine, hips, knees, and feet. A larger brain would later become important, but brain tissue uses a great deal of energy. A long childhood allowed more learning, but also left young humans dependent for many years. Even the human face, jaw, and teeth carry traces of diet, development, and deep ancestry. Evolution does not create perfect designs. It works with what already exists. It modifies older bodies slowly, keeping what is good enough and changing what can be changed. This is why the origin of modern humans cannot be separated from the body's ordinary needs. Before there was language, there was breath. Before there was memory told in words, there was a nervous system noticing danger. Before there were shelters, there was skin feeling wind and cold. Before there were tools made with intention, there were hands touching, gripping, pulling, and carrying. The body was the first place where the long story gathered. A slight shift in posture could change what an ancestor saw across open ground. A change in foot structure could affect how far it could travel. A change in diet could influence where a group spent its time. A change in social care could help more young survive. These are not dramatic events. They are small, bodily realities repeated across generations. In a calm evolution story, it is important not to make the body sound like it was marching toward a goal. Ancient ancestors did not possess unfinished versions of modern bodies. They possessed bodies suited, more or less, to their own time. Some could climb well. Some walked upright in ways different from us. Some had brains smaller than ours but large enough for the lives they lived. Some lived in forms that eventually disappeared. The human body we know today came from this branching, uneven history. It carries traces of movement, food, climate, birth, care, and risk. It is not a clean invention. It is an inheritance. And when we speak of traveling from ancient ancestors to modern humans, we are really speaking about this slow bodily record. Millions of quiet adjustments, made without a plan, preserved only when life allowed them to continue. Walking on two legs is one of the most recognizable features in the long story from ancient ancestors to modern humans, but it should not be treated as a simple badge of superiority. Upright walking did not make our ancestors better than other animals. It only made a certain way of living possible under certain conditions. Many animals move perfectly well in their own forms. A cat does not need to stand upright to be successful. A bird does not need hands to master the air. An ape in the trees is not failed because it is not human. In the same way, early members of the human line were not climbing a ladder toward greatness when their bodies began to carry more weight on two legs. They were living within landscapes where movement, food, danger, and energy all mattered. Bipedalism, the habit of moving upright on 2 feet, appears very early in the human family, long before large modern human brains, long before writing, and long before any clear human culture. Fossils suggest that some ancient relatives could walk upright while still keeping features useful for climbing. This is important because it reminds us that evolution rarely changes one thing cleanly. A body can carry old abilities and new pressures at the same time. An ancestor might move through trees, cross open ground, reach for fruit, travel between patches of food, and stay alert in a mixed environment. Walking upright did not suddenly turn such a creature into a person. It only changed the relationship between body and ground. When the spine, pelvis, legs, knees, ankles, and feet gradually carried the body differently, new possibilities appeared, but so did new costs. Upright walking can be efficient over distance, especially compared with some forms of knuckle walking, and it can allow the head and eyes to sit higher above the ground. It can leave the hands less tied to movement, making it easier to carry food, infants, branches, stones, or other useful objects. It may also have helped with heat management in open environments, though scientists are careful not to reduce its origin to one single cause. The honest answer is that bipedalism probably came from several pressures working together over long time. Changing habitats, food location, movement between trees and ground, energy use, carrying, and social life may all have played parts. This matters for the title of our story, because the journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not made by one miracle trait. It was made by slow combinations. 2 legs alone did not create humanity. A walking body still needed food, safety, young that survived, and groups that could continue. We often imagine upright posture as the moment when humanity began to rise above nature, but that image is misleading. To stand upright was still to be vulnerable. Legs could break, feet could be injured, a back could ache. A pelvis shaped for walking had to remain part of childbirth. A body lifted higher from the ground could see farther, but it could also be seen. Every advantage came with a trade. Evolution does not hand out gifts without cost. It reshapes older structures in ways that are good enough, not perfect. Even modern humans carry these compromises in our spines, knees, feet, and hips. The body that lets us walk, wander, carry, and cross long distances is also a body that can feel strain from the same arrangement. In that sense, every step we take is a quiet reminder of ancient ancestry. We are not separate from the old experiments of the body. We live inside them. For early ancestors, however, none of this had meaning as a future story. No one walked upright because speech would one day exist. No one carried food because a city would one day be built. A mother keeping an infant close, a young individual crossing a stretch of open ground, a group moving toward water, an adult lifting something useful from the earth. These acts belonged to the present, yet over generations, they helped shape the living pattern in which later human traits could gather. Once the hands were less needed for ordinary movement on the ground, they could become more available for touching, holding, sharing, and eventually making. But even here, we must move slowly. Hands did not become modern in a single leap, and walking upright did not guarantee tools, language, or thought. It simply changed the stage on which later changes could unfold. The ancient body, balanced on 2 feet, was still only trying to live. And from that ordinary effort, one of the deepest foundations of modern humanity began to take shape. When the hands became less tied to ordinary movement on the ground, they did not suddenly become human hands. They were already ancient instruments, inherited from primate ancestors who climbed, grasped, held branches, searched for food, and touched the bodies of others. Long before stone tools became a clear part of the archaeological record, hands had been shaped by life in trees, by reaching, pulling, balancing, picking, and holding. What changed slowly in the human line was not that hands appeared from nowhere, but that a different kind of body gave them more time and more freedom. A creature walking more often on 2 legs could use its hands while moving across the land. It could carry food away from where it was found. It could hold an infant close. It could pick up a stone, a stick, a bone, or a piece of plant matter and keep it for a short time. These acts were simple, but in the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, simple acts repeated across generations could become deeply important. The free hand did not make humanity by itself. It opened a quiet space where many later abilities could gather. To carry something is not a small thing in an ancient world. Food found in one place could be taken to another. A mother or caregiver could move with a young body held against the chest or hip. A useful object could remain with the group instead of being left behind. A hand could pull apart plants, dig, turn over wood, break open shells, strip meat from bone, or test the shape of a stone. Some of these actions may have happened before deliberate tool-making in the later human sense. Many animals use objects in limited ways, and early hominins were part of a world where behavior could be flexible without being modern. The difference was not a sudden awakening, but a slow deepening of possibility, a hand that could grasp more precisely, guided by eyes, memory, and attention, could make small differences in how food was gathered, shared, and prepared. A thumb and fingers working together could change what the body could do with the world, yet the honest story must remain careful. We should not imagine an early ancestor looking at its hand and understanding the future of tools, art, writing, or technology. It only touched what was near. It only held what mattered in that moment. Still, the origin of modern humans cannot be told without this gradual partnership between upright movement, flexible hands, and a growing ability to learn from repeated contact with things. Hands also mattered because they belonged to social bodies. They were not only for objects, they were for grooming, comforting, signaling, warning, feeding, and holding the young. Among primates, touch is part of social life, and in the human line, the hand remained connected to care as much as to work. A hand could calm a child, it could offer food, it could point attention even before language became complex. It could show another individual where something was or how something might be done. Later, when stone tools became more deliberately shaped, hands would carry memory and movement. A young individual could watch an older one strike stone, scrape hide, or break a surface open. Learning did not live only in the brain. It lived in fingers, wrists, eyes, posture, patience, and repetition. This is why the body that had to survive first slowly became a body that could teach and be taught. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not only inside the skull, it was also in the way a hand returned to the same action again and again until the movement became familiar. A free hand changed the relationship between the body and time. Without hands available for carrying and shaping, many later human patterns would have been harder to develop. But freedom also brought dependence. A hand holding an infant could not hold another thing at the same moment. A body carrying food had to balance weight, risk, and distance. A tool could help, but it could also be lost, broken, or difficult to make. Nothing about the hand was magical. It was useful because it worked with the rest of the body and with the group. Feet carried the body, eyes guided attention, memory held the shape of places, others provided safety and learning. In this slow combination, the human line became more than a walking body, but not yet the modern human mind. It became a creature increasingly able to bring parts of the world with it: a child, a stone, a branch, a piece of food, a remembered action. The hand was where survival began to turn outward into care, manipulation, and shared skill. Millions of years later, modern humans would use hands to build shelters, make fire, shape tools, paint, write, and touch the faces of those they loved. But those later meanings were not present at the beginning. At first, there was only the ordinary hand, reaching into an ordinary world, carrying small things forward without knowing that it was helping carry the human story itself. The world that shaped our ancient ancestors did not care what they might become. It did not soften because one branch of life would someday produce modern humans. The ground could be dry, the air could turn cold, food could disappear from a familiar place, a wound could become dangerous, a young body could be lost before it had time to grow. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, it is tempting to imagine our lineage as unusually favored, as if nature quietly protected it because something important was coming. But the ancient world offered no such protection. Early members of the human family were not powerful rulers of the landscape. They were vulnerable animals, among many other animals, trying to survive in places already filled with teeth, claws, hunger, sickness, heat, darkness, and chance. Large predators did not see them as future people. Weather did not see them at all. This cold truth helps keep the evolution story honest. The human line began inside a world that was indifferent to human meaning. A dry season could reduce plant foods and water. A sudden injury could make walking harder. A sick child could weaken a group's chances. A broken tooth could change how well someone ate. A predator near the edge of a resting place could turn an ordinary evening into danger. None of these events needed to be dramatic in the way stories often make them dramatic. They were simply part of being alive in a world where survival had to be renewed every day. Our ancestors were not separate from this pressure. Their bodies, senses, and social habits were shaped by it. Before the later growth of culture, before the larger tool traditions, before modern language, there was the basic fact that a living body could fail. This matters deeply to the story of becoming human, because many of the traits we later think of as human may have grown from weakness as much as from strength. Attention mattered because danger was real. Memory mattered because food and water were not always obvious. Closeness mattered because a lone individual was often more exposed than one within a group. Care mattered because young bodies were fragile. Learning mattered because one mistake could carry a cost. The ancient ancestors of modern humans did not survive by overpowering the world. They survived, when they did survive, by fitting themselves carefully into it. They watched, they moved, they waited, they returned to places that had helped before. They avoided places that had harmed before. They may have followed signs in the land that modern people would barely notice: prints in soft soil, broken branches, the alarm calls of other animals, the smell of water, the change of light near evening, the silence that sometimes means something has moved nearby. These small acts of attention were not philosophy, they were not science, but they were part of the deep origin of the human mind, because a mind that notices danger and remembers safety has already begun to build a bridge between past and present. Still, we should not exaggerate. Early ancestors were not wise in the modern sense. They were not calm observers standing above nature. They were organisms inside nature, limited by their senses, bodies, and needs. Some survived long enough to reproduce, others did not. Many lines related to humans eventually disappeared. The path to modern humans remained uncertain because nature did not guarantee any branch a future. This is why the title of this story should be heard slowly. From ancient ancestors to modern humans was not a protected road. It was a passage through risk. Hunger was one of the oldest pressures. The body needs energy before it can do anything else. A brain, even a small one, needs fuel. Muscles need fuel. Pregnancy, nursing, healing, walking, and staying warm all need fuel. For early hominins, food likely came from varied sources, depending on species, time, and environment. Plant foods, fruits, seeds, roots, insects, and later, more animal resources in some groups. But whatever the mixture, food had to be found, reached, processed, and defended enough to matter. The land did not arrange itself for them. They had to meet the land as it was. Cold and heat also shaped life in quiet ways. A body too hot or too cold becomes slower, weaker, less able to think clearly or move safely. Shade, water, fire in later periods, shelter, group closeness, and timing of movement all became part of how survival worked. Disease and parasites were another invisible pressure. They left fewer clear traces than bones or tools, but no honest account of ancient life should forget that illness belonged to the natural world too. In this indifferent world, the ancestors of modern humans were never guaranteed to rise. Their story continued only because enough bodies survived enough seasons, enough young reached maturity, and enough small advantages carried forward. Before humans became the species that asks about its origin, they were fragile lives trying not to disappear. Survival in the ancient world did not belong only to the strongest body. Strength mattered, but it was never enough by itself. A powerful animal could still starve if it failed to find food. A fast animal could still die if it moved into the wrong place at the wrong time. For the ancient ancestors of modern humans, the path through an indifferent world depended on quieter abilities, noticing, remembering, waiting, copying, and reacting before danger came too close. These abilities do not look grand from a distance. They leave fewer marks than bones or stone tools, yet they were part of the living ground from which the human story slowly grew. An ancestor who noticed that birds had gone silent, who remembered where water had remained during a dry period, who stayed near familiar companions, or who hesitated before crossing exposed ground, might gain a small advantage. It was not wisdom in the modern sense. It was practical attention, shaped by need. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, the mind did not begin as a place for abstract thought. It began as a way for the body to remain alive in a world full of change. Observation was one of the oldest forms of safety. A landscape is never empty to an animal that depends on reading it. Light, smell, tracks, broken plants, calls from other animals, the movement of insects, the direction of wind, the posture of another member of the group, all of these could carry meaning. Early human relatives did not need words to respond to such signs. Many animals notice and react to their surroundings with great sensitivity, and our ancestors belonged to that same living world. What mattered was not that they were already human, but that their bodies and minds were being trained by repeated contact with risk. A place where food had been found before could be remembered. A place where danger had appeared could be avoided. A sound linked with threat could make the body tense before the eyes understood why. Memory, in this deep sense, was not a library of stories. It was a map of survival held in nerves, habits, and movement. The origin of modern human intelligence should not be imagined first as a sudden light inside the skull. It can also be imagined as a slow thickening of useful memory, where to go, whom to follow, what to fear, what to touch, what to leave alone, when to move, and when to stay still. Caution also mattered. Modern people often admire boldness, but in the ancient world, recklessness could be costly. A creature that ran toward every sound, ate every unfamiliar thing, or wandered too far from others, might not live long enough to pass on its traits. Careful hesitation could be useful. Watching before acting could be useful. Following an older individual who knew a route could be useful. This does not mean our ancestors were timid or helpless. It means that survival often required balance. Too much fear could prevent feeding. Too little fear could bring death. The living body had to judge, again and again, how close to approach, how far to travel, how long to rest, how quickly to flee. These small decisions were repeated through countless days that no fossil can fully describe. Yet without them, the later story of human evolution would have no foundation. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, the line was carried not only by bones that changed shape, but by behaviors that kept bodies alive long enough for those bones to matter. Group life made attention even more important. A single individual could learn from direct experience, but a group could multiply experience. One member might detect danger first, another might know a useful path. Young ones could observe older ones. A warning movement, a facial expression, a call, or a sudden shift in posture could spread information before any complex language existed. This kind of shared alertness was not modern culture, but it was a beginning of something deeply important. The human line became increasingly shaped by life with others. To survive near others, an individual had to notice not only predators and food, but also companions. Who was calm? Who was alarmed? Who had found something? Who needed care? Who could be approached? Who should be avoided? The mind that later became capable of human social life may have deep roots in these ordinary acts of reading bodies, faces, gestures, and attention. Still, this was not a straight path toward modern thought. Many animals live socially. Many remember, observe, warn, and learn. Our ancestors were not alone in these abilities. What made the human story unusual was how, over very long time, bodily change, social life, memory, flexible hands, movement across varied landscapes, and learning began to reinforce one another. A cautious observer could survive. A survivor could learn. A learner could help the young. Young who stayed alive could carry forward both inherited traits and learned patterns. Slowly, the line leading toward modern humans became less dependent on strength alone and more dependent on relationships between body, place, memory, and group. In that quiet shift, we can see an early shape of ourselves, not as masters of nature, but as vulnerable creatures who began to live by paying attention. A small change is easy to ignore when it is seen inside one life. A slightly stronger grip, a slightly better memory for a path, a slightly different way of standing, a little more patience near danger, a child who learned one useful habit earlier than another child. These things do not look like the beginning of a species. They look ordinary. They look almost invisible. Yet the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans was built from changes so small that no single generation could have recognized them as history. In an indifferent world, where hunger, injury, weather, predators, and disease could end a life without meaning, even a small advantage could matter if it appeared at the right time and could be passed forward. Evolution does not need a grand leap to change a lineage. It only needs slight differences, repeated through enough births, enough seasons, and enough deaths. One individual might survive a dry period because it remembered where water remained. Another might keep a young one alive because it stayed close to the group. Another might reach food more efficiently, carry something useful, or notice danger a moment earlier. Most of these moments disappeared without leaving a trace. But if the body that survived also reproduced, and if certain inherited traits helped its descendants in similar conditions, then the smallest difference could become part of a longer pattern. This is the quiet mathematics behind the origin of modern humans, not destiny. Not a sudden rise, only life continuing unevenly, with some forms lasting longer than others. The difficulty is that modern eyes want to see importance only in large changes. A bigger brain, a more upright body, a sharper tool, a longer migration. But each of those larger changes depended on many smaller ones before it. A foot does not become adapted for long walking in a single step. A hand does not become more precise in one morning. A brain does not grow more complex without costs in energy, birth, development, and care. Every change has to fit into a living body that still needs to eat, sleep, heal, move, and remain safe. A trait that seems useful from far away might be harmful if it makes life harder in another way. A larger brain may support learning, but it also needs more calories. A longer childhood may allow deeper learning, but it also means a child depends on others for a longer time. Upright walking may free the hands, but it changes the strain on the spine, hips, knees, and feet. In this way, the path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was never a clean improvement. It was a long negotiation between benefit and cost. The environment decided nothing with kindness. It only tested whether a body and a behavior worked well enough to continue. Many lines did not continue. Many relatives of humans disappeared. Their disappearance does not mean they were failures in the simple sense. They lived for a time in their own worlds, with their own adaptations, until conditions changed, competition shifted, populations became helped too small, or chance turned against them. The human line that led to us is the one we can look back from, but it was not the only possible line. This matters because it protects the story from becoming too proud. Modern humans are not the obvious ending of life on Earth. They are one surviving branch of a much wider and more fragile history. For most of that history, the future remained open. If a climate pattern had changed differently, if a small population had vanished, if one group had failed to raise enough young, if a useful trait had never spread, the story might have turned another way. Yet enough small differences gathered. A little more flexibility in food, a little more skill in moving across varied land, a little more attention to others, a little more ability to learn by watching, a little more care for young who needed time. None of these alone made modern humans. Together, over deep time, they helped create a creature whose survival depended less on one fixed instinct and more on adjustment. This is one of the calmest truths of evolution. What looks like a great transformation from far away was lived as ordinary pressure from close up. There was no moment when an ancient ancestor became aware that the human future had begun. There were only days that had to be survived, bodies that carried inherited variation, and groups that endured long enough for learning and biology to meet. The world did not guide them toward us, but through countless small tests, it allowed some patterns to remain. From those patterns, slowly and without promise, the human story continued. The human mind did not wake in a single morning. There was no hidden moment when an ancient ancestor suddenly looked at the world and became modern inside. The slow growth of the mind was tied to the slow pressures of the body, the group, and the land. A brain is not only a place for thought, it is an organ that must be fed, cooled, protected, and carried inside a living skull. It uses energy, it develops through childhood, it depends on the body around it and the world that teaches it. For ancient ancestors, a larger or more flexible brain would only matter if it helped life continue. It had to help a body find food, avoid danger, learn from others, remember places, manage fear, and care for young. The mind did not grow because nature wanted poetry, memory, science, or history. It grew because attention could help survival, and because learning could make a vulnerable creature less helpless in changing environments. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, the brain should not be imagined as a sudden flame. It was more like a slow deepening of response. Earlier members of the human family had brains smaller than ours, and different species showed different patterns of body and brain over time. Fossil skulls can give scientists clues about brain size and shape, but they cannot show us every thought, fear, memory, or social bond. So the honest story must stay careful. We can say that over millions of years, the human lineage shows important changes in brain size, development, and behavior, but we should not pretend to know the private inner life of every ancestor. What we can understand is the pressure surrounding them. A creature living in a changing landscape needed to learn more than one fixed habit. It needed to notice where food appeared, where danger had been seen, which companions were safe, which routes led to water, and which signals from others should not be ignored. These needs did not create a modern mind all at once. They gave value to memory, attention, and flexibility. Social life also helped shape the mind slowly. To live near others is to live inside another kind of environment. A group is not only protection, it is also information. One individual may see danger before another, one may find food, one may know a path, one may care for a child, while another searches. But group life also requires awareness. An ancestor had to recognize familiar individuals, respond to fear or calm in others, understand closeness and distance, and learn from repeated contact. Long before modern language, the body could still read posture, sound, movement, touch, and expression. A mind that could follow the attention of others, remember relationships, and learn from watching would have an advantage in a social world. This is one of the quiet origins of modern humanity. The mind grew not in isolation, but among bodies that needed one another. The brain became important because life was not simple. If survival had depended only on one instinct repeated forever, flexibility would have mattered less. But ancient ancestors lived with shifting climates, mixed habitats, varied foods, predators, injuries, births, young that needed care, and groups that changed over time. A mind that could compare, remember, hesitate, imitate, and adjust could help a body survive conditions that did not stay the same. Still, every advantage had a cost. A larger brain needs more energy, and energy has to come from food. A longer period of development allows learning, but it also means children remain dependent for longer. This dependence could only continue where care, sharing, protection, and social tolerance were strong enough. So the growth of the mind was never separate from the growth of human social life. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not simply a skull becoming larger, it was a whole way of living becoming more dependent on learning. Hands, eyes, feet, memory, childhood, food, and companionship all belonged to the same slow change. The mind became more capable because the world kept asking difficult questions of the body: where to go, what to eat, who to trust, what to fear, what to remember, and how to keep the young alive. Our ancestors did not answer these questions with philosophy. They answered with movement, caution, imitation, and repeated experience. Over time, those ordinary answers helped shape a brain that could hold more of the world inside itself. Not yet the modern mind we know, not yet the mind that could tell its own history, but a mind growing slowly from the need to survive, belong, and learn. Memory was not first a place for stories. In the deep past, before writing, before settled villages, before modern language in its full form, memory was a practical way of staying alive. It helped a body return to water, avoid a dangerous slope, recognize a familiar face, notice a season of fruit, and remember where fear had once appeared. For ancient ancestors on the long path toward modern humans, memory did not need to be poetic to matter. It only needed to be useful. A remembered path could save energy. A remembered food source could help a hungry group. A remembered sound, smell, or place could make the body cautious before danger became visible. This kind of memory was older than human history, older than any name for the self. It belonged to a creature moving through land that changed slowly, but not randomly. Water came and went. Plants ripened and disappeared. Animals migrated, nested, hunted, or gathered in familiar patterns. A mind that could hold some of these patterns, even imperfectly, had a better chance of guiding the body through the next day. In this way, the origin of modern humans was connected not only to bones and tools, but to the quiet ability to carry pieces of the world inside the nervous system. Recognition also mattered. A face was not simply a face. A familiar individual could mean safety, warning, food, care, tension, or belonging. Long before complex speech, social animals already had to know one another in practical ways. For ancestors of the human line, recognizing companions may have helped maintain group life, protect young, and respond to danger more quickly. If one individual became alarmed, others could notice. If an older member moved toward a known path, younger ones could follow. If a caregiver stayed close, a child could remain safer. The mind that later became capable of remembering names, promises, stories, and ancestors may have begun from this older need to recognize bodies, moods, movements, and relationships. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was therefore not only a path of bigger brains, it was a path of richer connections between memory and life. Memory of land, memory of others, memory of danger, memory of useful action. Roots were especially important because the ancient world could not be searched like a map. A body had to know through experience. A dry riverbed might still lead toward water in another season. A line of trees might suggest shade or food. A ridge might offer sight over open ground, but also exposure. A cave, overhang, or cluster of trees might be safer at one time and dangerous at another. These meanings had to be learned slowly, through repeated movement. No fossil can show us a remembered path inside an ancient mind, yet the need for such memory is clear from the kind of life our ancestors faced. To survive in varied environments, they had to connect place with experience. They had to learn that the world was not only what appeared in the present moment, it had a past, and that past could guide the next step. Seasonal change added another layer. Many animals respond to seasons, and our ancestors were part of that same natural rhythm. The return of rain, the drying of grass, the movement of herds, the ripening of fruit, the cold of night, the heat of open land, all of these could shape where a group moved and what it could eat. Later, humans would tell stories about seasons, make calendars, and build rituals around time. But long before any of that, the body and mind were already learning that time returned in patterns. This does not mean early ancestors understood time as modern humans do. It means their survival depended on noticing repetition. A place that had food once might have food again. A danger that appeared at dusk might be expected at dusk. A group that remembered more of these patterns could live with slightly more preparation. In the calm story of evolution, such memory is not dramatic, but it is profound. It shows how the modern human mind grew from ordinary needs to find, to avoid, to recognize, to return, and to expect. Before we became people who ask where we came from, we were descendants of creatures that remembered where they had been. And somewhere inside that ancient practical memory, the first quiet foundations of human thought were being laid. The mind that would one day ask about human origins began with tasks so ordinary that they can almost disappear from view. Finding a way back to water, watching another body reach for food, learning which stones could cut and which plants should be left alone, staying near a familiar group when the land felt unsafe, remembering the shape of a valley, the sound of alarm in birds, the smell of rain after dry days, the face of a caregiver, the direction of shade in the afternoon. These were not small things to the ancient ancestors of modern humans. They were the daily material from which attention and learning were built. Long before people could explain the past, the nervous system was already joining past experience to present action. A place once found could be found again. A danger once survived could be avoided. A skill once watched could be attempted by younger hands. This is why the slow growth of the mind cannot be separated from the ordinary life of the body. A brain did not become useful because it floated above nature. It became useful because the body was inside nature, vulnerable, hungry, social, and always moving through conditions it did not control. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, thinking first appeared not as philosophy, but as adjustment. To adjust is to notice that one moment is not exactly like another. A dry season is different from a wet one. A familiar group member is different from a stranger. A safe path in daylight may be dangerous in darkness. A food that is useful after preparation may be harmful before it. A young individual watching an older one does not need full human language to learn something important. It can copy a movement, follow a route, recognize hesitation, or repeat a gesture. Learning from others may have been one of the deepest changes in the human line because it allowed experience to move beyond one body. If one individual discovered a useful behavior and another learned it, the group could carry more than instinct, it could carry habit. Later, much later, human beings would carry stories, names, tools, rituals, and teaching. But the beginning was quieter, watching, repeating, correcting, remembering. The ancient mind also grew from the need to connect separate things. A track in mud could mean an animal had passed. A certain fruiting tree could mean a season had returned. A call from another group member could mean danger or discovery. The ability to link signs with events did not make an ancestor modern, but it made the world more readable. A readable world is still dangerous, but it is less blind. This mattered for the origin of modern humans, because our line became increasingly dependent on flexible response. Many animals learn, remember, and solve problems, so this was not a human-only beginning. The honest story should say that clearly. Our ancestors did not stand apart from other life as creatures of pure thought. They shared many older capacities with the wider animal world. What changed slowly was the way several capacities gathered together: upright movement, freer hands, social attention, memory, imitation, longer development, and a growing dependence on learned behavior. Together, these did not create modern humans immediately. They created a living pattern in which later human minds could become possible. A child could grow by watching others for longer. A group could hold useful habits through repeated practice. A hand could learn a movement before the voice could explain it. A face could signal fear before a sentence existed. The mind was not born separate from such things. It was woven through them. This is why the calm evolution story must keep returning to origin, not as a single event, but as a deep continuity. Modern humans can think about time because earlier creatures remembered. We can teach because earlier creatures watched and copied. We can ask where we came from because long before that question existed, bodies were already learning where they had been. The mind did not arrive fully formed. It gathered slowly from paths, hunger, water, danger, care, faces, seasons, and hands repeating what other hands had done. Somewhere in those ordinary acts, the distance between ancient ancestors and modern humans began to narrow, not because anyone understood the future, but because life kept preserving the small abilities that made the next day more survivable. The first tools were not symbols of greatness. They were not the beginning of technology in the modern sense, and they were not proof that ancient ancestors had suddenly become fully human. A stone edge, a broken flake, a heavy rock used for pounding, or a sharp fragment held in the hand belonged first to the same practical world as hunger, distance, danger, and care. A tool mattered because the body alone was limited. Fingers could pull, tear, press, and hold, but they could not always cut through hide, crack hard shells, break bone, or scrape tough surfaces. Teeth could bite, but teeth could also wear down or break. Nails were weak compared with stone. The hand could reach into the world, but a tool could let the hand do more than flesh could do by itself. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, this was one of the quiet changes. The body began to borrow strength, sharpness, and hardness from the materials around it. A stone did not become important because it looked impressive. It became important because, in the right hand and the right moment, it could open food, shape wood, cut meat, process plants, or make another task less difficult. The earliest known stone tools in the archaeological record show that tool use and tool-making began very deep in human ancestry, before modern humans existed, and even before some later members of the human family appeared. Scientists still discuss exactly which ancient relatives made the oldest tools, and the evidence does not allow every detail to be known. But the larger point is clear enough. The roots of human tool behavior are older than Homo sapiens. This helps keep the story honest. Tools did not arrive as a sudden human invention. They grew from older abilities: grasping, striking, choosing, repeating, watching, and remembering. Many animals use objects in simple ways, so the use of things in the environment is not uniquely human by itself. What became important in the human line was the gradual deepening of this relationship. A stone was no longer only part of the ground. It could become an extension of action. It could carry intention, even if that intention was very simple. To strike one stone against another and produce a sharp edge requires more than strength. It requires attention to shape, angle, force, and result. It requires a body to notice that one kind of stone breaks better than another, that one blow works and another does not, that a flake can be useful after it falls away. This kind of learning may sound small, but it links hand, eye, memory, and material into one movement. For ancient ancestors, that movement did not need to be explained in words. It could live in practice. It could be repeated because it worked. It could be seen by younger individuals and copied imperfectly until it became more familiar. In that way, the first tools were not just objects. They were traces of behavior. They show that survival had begun to include learned relationships with the physical world. A sharp stone could change what food was available. A pounding stone could make hard resources easier to use. A scraping edge could help prepare animal or plant material. These advantages were not magical, and they did not remove danger from life. A tool could not stop drought, heal every wound, or protect a group from all predators. But it could create small openings in a difficult world. It could make the difference between food that remained closed and food that became reachable. It could help a weaker body use force from outside itself. It could allow a hand to become more than a hand. This matters for the calm evolution story because modern humans are tool-making animals. But the beginning of that trait was not modern. It was ancient, practical, and rooted in need. Long before writing, farming, metal, wheels, or houses, there were hands choosing stones because some stones helped. There were eyes judging edges. There were bodies learning the feel of impact. There were groups living close enough for useful habits to be noticed. The origin of modern humans cannot be separated from this slow partnership between body and material. We became ourselves partly because our ancestors did not depend only on what their bodies were born with. They began, in small ways, to use the world, to meet the world. A tool was not a declaration that humanity had arrived. It was a quiet answer to a simple problem. The body needs help, and the ground sometimes offers it. To make a tool is to slow the hand down. It is not only to pick up a stone and strike, it is to notice that one stone breaks differently from another, that an edge can be made sharper, that force can be too weak or too strong, that the angle of a blow changes the result. In the deep story from ancient ancestors to modern humans, this kind of attention was important because it joined the body to memory. A tool did not appear only from muscle. It came from repeated contact with material, from the hand learning what the eye had seen before, from failure being felt and corrected. An early ancestor did not need modern language to learn that some stones were more useful than others. The lesson could live in movement. A hand could try, fail, try again, and gradually repeat what worked. This is why early tool-making matters so much. It shows not only that ancient relatives could use objects, but that some of them could stay with a task long enough for skill to form. Patience, in this ancient sense, was not a moral virtue. It was a survival behavior. A creature that could keep working at a stone, or return to a familiar method, or watch another individual make a sharp edge, was beginning to live in a world where actions could be improved by practice. That does not mean early toolmakers thought like modern humans. It means that the roots of modern human learning were already being prepared in ordinary movements. The origin of our species cannot be separated from this slow training of hand, eye, attention, and memory. When a young individual watched an older one break stone or use a sharp flake, something more than food processing may have been happening. Experience was moving from one body to another. It may not have been teaching in the formal human sense. There may have been no clear words, no explanation, no story about why the tool mattered, but watching itself can carry knowledge. The younger body sees the posture, the grip, the rhythm, the kind of stone chosen, the way a hand turns the object, the moment when the sharp edge appears. It copies imperfectly, it makes mistakes, it tries again. Over time, such imitation can help a group keep useful behaviors alive beyond the life of one individual. This is one quiet bridge between ancient ancestors and modern humans. Knowledge became less trapped inside one body. It could be observed, repeated, and slowly passed forward. Tools also created a new kind of time. A stone edge made today could help with food a little later. A useful object might be carried for a while, kept near a resting place, or recognized again as valuable. This does not require the full planning of modern people, but it does suggest that action was no longer only immediate. A hand could prepare for a need that had not yet fully arrived. That small distance between now and later is deeply important in the calm evolution story. Modern humans live inside long chains of preparation, but those chains began in simpler forms: choosing, shaping, keeping, returning, repeating. A tool tradition, even a simple one, depends on more than intelligence. It depends on social closeness, because others must be near enough to observe. It depends on memory, because the useful movement must be repeated. It depends on material knowledge, because not every stone works the same way. It depends on bodies that can hold attention long enough for an action to become skill. None of this should be exaggerated into a sudden human awakening. Early tools were still part of a hard world of hunger, weather, injury, and risk, but they show that survival was becoming increasingly linked to learned behavior. A stone tool was not only a stone, it was a record of contact between mind and matter. It held, in its shape, the fact that an ancient hand had done something more than react. It had selected, struck, adjusted, and left behind a mark of repeated understanding. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, that ability to learn from things, from others, and from one's own mistakes would become one of the deepest foundations of human life. Long before schools, books, or spoken histories, there were hands teaching other hands without knowing they were doing so. Tools changed the relationship between ancient ancestors and the world around them, not by making life easy, but by opening small doors that the body alone could not open. A sharp stone edge could cut through material that teeth and fingers struggled with. A heavy stone could crack, pound, or break. A pointed stick or shaped piece of wood, though rarely preserved in the archaeological record because wood decays, may have helped with digging, reaching, or processing plants. Bone, stone, wood, hide, flesh, roots, shells, and seeds were no longer only things encountered by the body, they became materials that could be worked on. This was a quiet but important shift in the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans. The world was still dangerous. Food was still uncertain. Predators, weather, injury, and disease still remained. But a creature with a useful object in its hand met the world differently from a creature with only skin, nails, and teeth. The tool did not remove weakness. It helped weakness negotiate with the environment. It allowed the hand to borrow hardness from stone, weight from rock, leverage from wood, and sharpness from a broken edge. In this way, tool use slowly changed what survival could mean. It did not make ancient ancestors rulers of nature. It made them more active participants in shaping small parts of their surroundings. Food was one of the clearest places where this mattered. Some foods are hidden, tough, protected, or difficult to process. A root may need digging, a nut may need cracking, a carcass may have meat attached to bone or marrow sealed inside. A plant may need stripping, scraping, or breaking before it becomes easier to eat. Tools could help ancient relatives use resources that might otherwise be harder to reach. This does not mean that early hominins were all hunters in the dramatic sense people often imagine. The honest story is broader and calmer. For much of deep human ancestry, food likely came from many sources, depending on species, place, season, and opportunity. There were plant foods, insects, small animals, scavenged remains, and later more organized forms of hunting in some human groups. Tools helped widen the possible menu. They gave ancient ancestors more ways to respond when the land changed. If one food was scarce, another might be processed. If a carcass was found, sharp flakes might help remove tissue. If bones could be broken, marrow might become available. These small changes mattered because the origin of modern humans was tied to energy. Bodies need energy to move, grow, nurse children, heal, and support the brain. A tool that helped obtain more usable food could affect more than one meal. It could affect strength, survival, learning, and care. Tools also changed the relationship with animals. They did not instantly place ancient ancestors above other creatures. For a long time, early human relatives were still vulnerable among larger and stronger animals. But tools could allow a different kind of contact with animal bodies and animal traces. A sharp edge could process a carcass. A stone could break bone. Later tools would make hunting, scraping hides, cutting meat, and shaping materials more effective. Even then, the relationship remained complex. Animals were danger, food, competitors, signs in the landscape, and eventually part of human memory and imagination. In the early stages, however, the key point is simple. Tools allowed ancient ancestors to interact with animal resources in ways their bodies alone could not easily manage. The same was true of plants and stone. Plants were not just background. They offered food, fibers, sheltering materials, shade, and sometimes danger. Stone was not just ground. Some kinds broke into useful edges. Others worked better for pounding. Choosing one material over another required experience. A useful place in the landscape might become worth remembering because good stone, water, food, or shelter could be found there. Slowly, tools connected the body to place in a new way. A group did not only move through the land, it learned which parts of the land could help it live. This was not modern science, but it was knowledge. It was practical, repeated, and carried in action. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, this growing relationship with material was one of the deep foundations of culture. A tool could be copied, a method could be repeated, a useful object could be recognized by another hand. A place where stone was found could become part of a group's memory. None of this required cities, writing, or full modern thought. It required attention, practice, and enough social closeness for habits to continue. In the end, the first tools were not just tools because they changed more than the object in the hand. They changed the space between body and world. They made food more reachable, materials more useful, animal remains more accessible, and landscapes more memorable. They show us that the human story did not grow only inside the skull. It also grew at the edge of stone, in the pressure of fingers, in repeated movements, and in the quiet discovery that the world could be touched, shaped, and remembered. Fire is often imagined as a sudden discovery, a bright moment when ancient life changed overnight. But the honest story is slower than that. Fire did not enter the human journey as a miracle that instantly made our ancestors modern. It was dangerous, difficult, and not always under control. Lightning could burn grasslands. Volcanic places could hold natural heat. Burning wood could frighten as much as help. For a long time, fire may have been something watched before it was something managed, approached carefully before it was carried, used occasionally before it became a steady part of life. The evidence for early fire use is not always simple, and scientists are careful because burned earth, heated stone, charcoal, and old hearths must be understood in their context. But over the long movement from ancient ancestors to modern humans, one thing became deeply important. Some human relatives eventually learned not only to fear fire, but to live near it, tend it, and make it part of daily survival. This change was not only about warmth. Warmth mattered, especially in cold nights, high places, and later movements into harsher climates. But fire also changed food. Cooking can make some foods softer, safer, and easier to digest. It can help break down tough plant material or meat, reduce some harmful organisms, and allow the body to gain energy with less chewing and effort. That does not mean fire alone created the modern human brain, or that one simple cause explains everything. Human evolution is never that clean, but fire became one of the many conditions that could support a different way of living. Around fire, darkness was pushed back a little. Not destroyed, not conquered, only held at the edge of light. A resting place with embers would feel different from a resting place without them. Night animals might keep more distance. Insects, cold, and fear might be reduced, though never removed. The group could remain awake in a different way after sunset. Hands could continue small tasks. Food could be shared while light still moved across faces. A child could see the bodies nearby. Older individuals could remain close. The night, which had once belonged almost entirely to cold, silence, and danger, began to hold a small center. This matters for a calm evolution story because fire was not only a tool, it was a placemaker. It gathered bodies. It created a point around which attention, warmth, food, and safety could meet. Long before houses, long before written stories, long before modern history, the glow of fire may have helped groups stay together through hours that had once been harder to use. Yet we must not turn this into a scene of perfect comfort. Ancient fire required work. Wood or other fuel had to be found. Embers had to be protected. Smoke could sting eyes and lungs. Flames could spread. A fire could fail in rain or wind. A group that depended on it had to learn its limits. This learning joined hand, eye, memory, and cooperation. Someone had to know what burned well. Someone had to notice when the fire weakened. Someone had to keep young bodies from danger. In this way, fire became part of the same slow pattern we have followed from ancient ancestors to modern humans. Survival depending more and more on learned relationships with the world. Fire changed eating, resting, warmth, social closeness, and movement through climates. But it did not make humans separate from nature. It made them more deeply involved with one of nature's strongest forces. To live with fire was to borrow heat from the world while respecting its danger. It was another form of the ancient human bargain. The body is vulnerable, the night is large, and survival sometimes depends on learning how to stay near what could also harm you. Shelter began long before houses. In the deep story from ancient ancestors to modern humans, shelter was not first a wall, a roof, a village, or a place with a name. It was a careful choice made inside a dangerous landscape. A body needed somewhere to rest where wind was weaker, rain was reduced, predators were less likely to approach, and young could remain close. A shelter could be a rock overhang, a cave entrance, a cluster of trees, a hollow protected from open wind, a place near water but not too exposed, or later, a simple arrangement of branches, stones, hides, grass, or other materials. Much of this early behavior is hard to see in the archaeological record because wood, leaves, hides, and fibers decay far more easily than stone. So the honest story must be careful. We should not imagine every ancient group living in neat huts, and we should not imagine shelter as a sudden invention. It was probably many different habits in many different environments, shaped by weather, available materials, danger, and repeated experience. To find shelter was to read the land. A cave might be useful, but it could also be occupied by animals, damp, dark, or unsafe. An open place might allow a wide view, but it could leave bodies exposed to cold and predators. A place close to water could save energy, but water also drew other animals. A grove could offer shade and protection from wind, but it might limit sight. Ancient ancestors had to weigh such things without maps, written knowledge, or modern planning. Their knowledge lived in movement, memory, and group habit. A safe resting place from one season might not be safe in another. A place that protected from rain might hold smoke badly once fire became common. A place that helped a group sleep might become dangerous if too much waste, smell, or attention gathered there. Shelter, then, was not simply a structure. It was a relationship between body, place, memory, and risk. This matters to the calm evolution story because the path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not only shaped by bones and brains, it was also shaped by where bodies could pause. Rest is part of survival. Sleep is not weakness, it is a biological need. But sleeping bodies are vulnerable bodies. They see less, move slower, and depend more on the group and the place around them. A young child asleep beside a caregiver, an injured adult resting after movement, an older individual staying near warmth and protection, all of these lives depended on spaces where danger was reduced enough for the body to recover. The ability to choose, remember, and return to safer places may have quietly supported longer social life, care, and learning. In later human groups, shelters became more deliberately made and more culturally varied, but their roots were simple. The night is cold, the body tires, the young need protection, and the world does not stop being dangerous just because a creature needs sleep. As fire became more important in some human lives, shelter and fire may have shaped each other. A sheltered place could protect embers from wind or rain. Fire could make a resting place warmer and more visible, but both required care. Smoke needed space to move. Fuel had to be gathered. Flames had to be kept from bedding, dry grass, or young hands. Again, there was no perfect safety, only a better arrangement than being fully exposed. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, this is a recurring pattern. The body finds a small improvement, repeats it, remembers it, and gradually builds a way of life around it. A shelter did not make a home in the emotional sense all at once. But it may have created a center, a place where a group returned, where food was shared, where tools were used, where children watched older hands, where the day ended in a slightly more protected circle. Long before cities and permanent houses, the human story was already being shaped by the search for a place to stop. Not a place outside nature, but a place within nature, where wind, darkness, hunger, fear, warmth, care, and memory could gather for one more night. The long night was one of the oldest teachers in the human story. During the day, ancient ancestors could move, search, watch, carry, gather, and learn from the land, but night changed the rules. The same body that could cross ground under light became more exposed when darkness reduced sight. Sounds grew harder to place, cold settled into the skin. Young bodies needed warmth, tired bodies needed sleep. A group that had spent daylight searching for food now had to become still enough to rest, but alert enough not to be taken by surprise. This tension is important in the journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, because sleep was never separate from survival. To sleep is to surrender control for a while. The eyes close, the muscles loosen, the mind turns inward. For a vulnerable creature in an open world, this could only happen safely under certain conditions: a better place, familiar companions, some protection from weather, and later, in some groups, fire held close enough to give warmth and light. Night did not become safe. It became manageable. That difference matters. The ancient world did not offer comfort in the way modern people understand it. There were no walls that fully separated inside from outside. There were no locked doors, no lamps, no soft beds, no fixed homes with stored food. Resting places were temporary, imperfect, and exposed to change. A cave mouth, a rock shelter, a grove, a windbreak, or a place near fire could reduce danger, but never erase it. The body still had to listen. The group still had to remain close. Some may have slept while others were more wakeful, though we should be careful not to imagine this as a formal system in every ancient group. What we can say honestly is that group living made sleep less solitary. A child close to a caregiver was safer than a child alone. A tired adult near familiar bodies had more protection than one isolated in the dark. Warmth could be shared, movement could be noticed, alarm could spread quickly. In this way, the night helped shape the social body. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not only built in daylight through walking, tools, and food. It was also shaped by the need to rest together without disappearing. Around fire, when fire became part of life for some human relatives and later human groups, night gained a different center. The glow did not simply make darkness beautiful. It changed what bodies could do after sunset. Food could be eaten more slowly. Hands could finish small tasks. Faces could remain visible. Young ones could settle near warmth. Older individuals, injured individuals, and caregivers could stay close within a circle of light. The human mind may have found new space there, not as sudden storytelling or modern imagination, but as calmer attention after the hardest work of the day. Memory often gathers in stillness. A route taken in daylight can be held more clearly at rest. A danger scene can remain in the body. A useful action watched earlier can be repeated later. We should not claim too much about the private thoughts of ancient ancestors, because those thoughts are not preserved. But it is reasonable to understand that rest, safety, memory, and group closeness were connected. A creature that never rested well would struggle to heal, learn, care, and continue. Sleep, then, belongs deeply to the origin of modern humans, not because sleeping made us human by itself, but because the human line carried fragile bodies that needed recovery and social protection. The night asked a simple question again and again: can this group remain safe while its bodies become helpless for a while? Across many generations, better answers to that question may have supported survival. A safer resting place, a closer group, a remembered shelter, a tended fire, a calmer child, a watchful adult, a familiar rhythm. At the end of the day, none of these was dramatic alone, but together they formed part of the ancient pattern of human life. Long before modern people used bedtime for stories, prayer, memory, or reflection, our ancestors already lived with the deep biological truth that no creature can survive only by moving. It must also stop. It must trust something, a place, a group, a warmth, a rhythm, or the return of morning. In the long movement from ancient ancestors to modern humans, the night did not merely interrupt the story, it held the bodies that allowed the story to continue. Modern humans did not come from ancestors who lived as isolated minds. The long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans was carried by bodies that needed other bodies. A lone individual might find food, flee danger, or rest for a while, but over time, life alone was a narrow path. Young were too vulnerable, injuries were too costly, food was too uncertain. Predators, weather, illness, and distance all made survival harder when no familiar group was nearby. This does not mean ancient ancestors lived in perfect harmony. Group life could bring tension, competition, hunger, noise, conflict, and the burden of sharing space. But it also offered something a single body could not easily create: more eyes watching the land, more ears hearing danger, more hands near the young, more memory held within the group. Before modern humans had villages, laws, or written rules, the deep foundation of social life was already present in the simple fact that staying near others could improve the chance of making it through another day. The origin of humanity was not only inside the skull or the hand, it was also between individuals. It was in the space where one body noticed another, where fear spread quickly, where a child was kept close, where food could sometimes be shared, where an older individual's experience could quietly guide the young. To understand this part of evolution honestly, we should not imagine early groups as peaceful families in the modern sense. They were living animals under pressure. Food could be limited, stronger individuals might take more, some members might leave, die, or be pushed away. Bonds could be fragile, yet even imperfect closeness could matter. A group did not need to be gentle in every moment to offer protection. It only needed to reduce risk enough for more young to survive, for more adults to recover, and for more useful habits to continue. In many social animals, group life helps with warning, defense, learning, and care. Our ancestors belonged to that wider natural pattern, but in the human line, social life gradually became tied to longer childhood, learning from others, tool use, food sharing, and memory. A child who remained close to older individuals could watch how they moved, what they touched, what they avoided, and where they returned. A caregiver did not need to explain the world in words for learning to begin. The young body could learn by staying near. It could see which foods were chosen, which sounds made adults tense, which paths led to water, and which faces meant safety. This is one of the quiet bridges from ancient ancestors to modern humans. Survival became increasingly connected to shared attention. Food sharing was likely uneven, varied, and different across species and times, but even small forms of sharing could change social life. A piece of food brought back, a carcass processed near others, a mother supported by the presence of familiar individuals, a child fed long enough to keep growing. These things made group life more than accidental gathering. They connected survival to relationship. Care for young was especially important because the human line eventually became marked by long development. A child who needs time to grow also needs protection during that time. Longer learning is valuable only if the young survive long enough to use it. This means that the growth of the human mind was linked to the growth of dependence. The more a young individual could learn, the more it needed others while learning. The more it needed others, the more social life shaped what kind of mind could develop. This does not make ancient ancestors noble, it makes them vulnerable in a social way. Their strength was not complete independence, but partial dependence managed well enough to continue. In the calm story of evolution, This is a profound idea. Modern humans often think of intelligence as something private, something inside one person. But the roots of intelligence were also shared. A group could remember more than one individual. A group could notice danger from more directions. A group could keep a skill alive after the first discoverer was gone. A group could protect a sleeping child, an injured adult, or a mother carrying young. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans therefore passed through cooperation, but not cooperation as a perfect moral ideal. It was practical, limited, sometimes tense, and still powerful. We became human not by escaping need, but by surviving through need together. Long before the first cities, long before stories were written, long before anyone named a family line, the human story was already forming around a quiet truth. One body alone was fragile, but several bodies, close enough to watch, learn, warn, and care, could keep more of the future alive. Cooperation in the ancient human line should not be imagined as kindness without conflict. It was not a peaceful circle where every individual always shared fairly, cared gently, and placed the group before the self. Ancient ancestors lived with hunger, fear, fatigue, competition, mating pressures, injury, and uncertainty. Under such conditions, tension was natural, food could be contested, space near warmth or shelter could matter. Stronger individuals might dominate weaker ones. A child might receive care from some and not from others. A group might split, lose members, or move under pressure. If we make early social life too gentle, we make the story less honest. But if we make it only violent and selfish, we also miss something important. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans depended on a middle ground, cooperation that was imperfect, practical, and strong enough to help life continue. A group did not need to be morally perfect to offer a survival advantage. It only needed to make some dangers smaller. Several individuals could notice a predator sooner than one. A tired mother could benefit from being near familiar bodies. Young ones could learn by watching more than one adult. Food found by one individual might sometimes reach others, especially children or close companions. A warning sound, a sudden movement, or the fear shown on a face could spread quickly through the group. These small forms of connection did not require modern laws or spoken promises. They grew from repeated living together. In the long movement from ancient ancestors to modern humans, cooperation was less like a noble idea and more like a fragile arrangement that worked often enough to be preserved. Harsh environments may have made this arrangement even more important. When food was uncertain, no single body could control every resource. When a landscape changed with season, group memory could become valuable. When children took a long time to mature, care had to stretch across many days, months, and years. When tools and useful habits became more important, learning from others became part of survival. A group that could tolerate closeness, share attention, and keep young alive had something powerful, even if it also carried conflict. This is a key point in the origin of modern humans. Dependence was not a weakness that evolution removed. Dependence became one of the conditions under which human abilities could grow. A young individual who needed protection for longer could also learn more from the group. An adult who stayed near others could gain information, support, and warning. A group that held together could pass on more habits than a scattered set of isolated bodies. Cooperation also changed the meaning of risk. One individual facing danger alone had fewer options. A group could move together, watch in different directions, defend young, or abandon a dangerous place more effectively. This does not mean early humans were always successful. Many died young. Many groups may have failed. Many related human forms eventually disappeared. But in the branches that led toward modern humans, enough social living continued for learning, care, and shared memory to become deeper parts of life. Over time, the mind had to become more sensitive not only to the land, but to other individuals. Who could be trusted? Who was angry? Who was frightened? Who knew where to go? Who was carrying food? Who needed help? These questions may sound simple, but they formed part of a growing social intelligence. To survive with others, An ancestor had to read faces, sounds, posture, distance, and repeated behavior. The group itself became a landscape. It had safe places and dangerous places, familiar routes and uncertain edges, warmth and tension. Modern humans still carry this ancient pattern. We are shaped by the need to belong, to notice others, to feel exclusion, to seek safety in familiar voices, and to learn through shared attention. These things did not begin in cities. They grew from older lives, where cooperation was never perfect, but where being close to others could mean the difference between a child growing up and a line ending quietly in the dark. A group becomes more than a gathering when its members begin to know one another through repeated life. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, this kind of familiarity may have mattered as much as strength, speed, or sharp senses. A body moving beside a familiar body learns what that body usually does. It learns who stays close to young ones, who reacts quickly to danger, who finds food, who follows, who avoids, who threatens, who calms. These were not roles in the modern sense. There were no written duties, no formal names for social positions, no planned community structure, but repeated behavior can create expectations long before anyone can explain them. A young individual might know which adult was safest to approach. A caregiver might recognize the cry or movement of a particular child. Older members, if they survived long enough, could carry valuable knowledge of places, seasons, routes, and dangers. A group that remembered its own members could become a living web of small dependencies. This was one of the quiet steps between ancient ancestors and modern humans. Survival began to rest not only on what one body could do, but on what many bodies could mean to one another. Community, in this early sense, should not be imagined as a settled village or a peaceful tribe with clear customs. For much of human evolution, groups were likely small, mobile, flexible, and shaped by food, danger, climate, birth, death, and movement. Members could come and go, groups could divide or merge. Bonds could be strong in some moments and weak in others. The honest story must leave room for uncertainty, because fossils and tools cannot show every relationship. But the broad direction is clear. The human line became increasingly social, and social life changed the kind of mind that could survive. To live with others, an ancestor had to pay attention to more than the physical landscape. It had to read the social landscape too. A face, a sound, a gesture, a posture, a distance between bodies, or a sudden silence inside the group could all carry meaning. The mind learned not only where water was, but who knew the way to water, not only where danger might appear, but who noticed danger first. Not only how food was found, but how food moved among bodies. This is why the origin of modern humans cannot be separated from interdependence. Human life became a pattern in which one person's survival was linked to another's attention, care, memory, and tolerance. Such interdependence was fragile. It could fail. Conflict could break trust. Hunger could narrow generosity. Fear could scatter a group. Yet when it worked even partly, it gave ancient ancestors something powerful, a way for experience to outlive the individual moment. A child could grow inside the habits of others. A tool-making motion could be watched again. A safe path could be followed before it was fully understood. A dangerous place could be avoided because older bodies moved away from it. The group became a kind of memory larger than one nervous system. Later, modern humans would build cultures, languages, laws, families, and histories from this deep social ground. But the beginning was quieter and more physical. It was the warmth of bodies sleeping near one another, the shared alarm when danger moved close, the pressure of a hand, the watching of a face, the following of footsteps, the returning to a known place. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, the mind slowly became accustomed to being unfinished alone. It expected others, it learned through others, it feared losing others. It depended on signals from others before words could make those signals clear. This may be one of the most important lessons of evolution. Becoming human did not mean becoming independent from nature or from one another. It meant becoming a creature whose survival was increasingly shaped by relationship. The body still needed food, warmth, rest, and safety. But now those needs were met inside a growing network of recognition, care, conflict, imitation, and memory. The ancient group was not yet society as we know it, but it was already more than a crowd. It was a place where the future could be protected by many imperfect lives at once. Before voices became language, communication was already older than words. A bot could warn, call, reach, turn away, point attention, show fear, offer food, refuse closeness, or invite another body nearer. Sound and gesture belonged to life long before modern humans existed. Birds called, primates signaled, infants cried. Adults reacted to movement, posture, touch, and expression. The honest story of human language should begin there, not with a sudden invention, and not with one ancient individual discovering speech in a single moment. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, communication likely grew through many small layers: vocal sounds, facial expression, hand movement, shared attention, imitation, emotional signals, and later more structured ways of linking sounds to meanings. We cannot hear the voices of early human relatives. No fossil preserves a spoken sentence. Bones can tell us something about anatomy, tools can suggest learning, and archaeology can reveal behavior, but the exact path from simple signals to full language remains difficult to reconstruct, so we should be careful. It is reasonable to say that human language has deep roots in social life, learning, cooperation, and the need to share attention. It is not honest to pretend we know the first word, the first sentence, or the exact day speech began. The beginning was almost certainly slower and more uneven than that. For ancient ancestors, a sound did not need to be a word to matter. A warning call could make others look up. A cry from a child could bring a caregiver close. A sharp change in tone could carry fear. A softer sound could reduce tension. A gesture toward food, danger, or movement could guide attention without explanation. Shared attention may have been especially important. When two individuals look toward the same thing and understand that they are attending to it together, communication becomes richer. A stone, a carcass, a path, a predator, a child, a useful plant, all could become the focus of more than one mind at once. This did not require modern grammar at first. It required bodies sensitive to one another. It required eyes that followed gaze, hands that showed direction, faces that carried emotion, and memories that linked signals with events. The origin of modern humans is tied to this quiet social skill, not only seeing the world, but helping another individual notice the same part of it. Language, when it later became more complex, did not float above survival. It served survival first. A group that could communicate about danger, food, movement, care, and tools had advantages over a group that could not share such information well. But we should not imagine early communication as modern conversation in rough clothing. It may have been partial, practical, emotional, and closely tied to immediate situations. Sounds could guide movement. Gestures could shape attention. Repeated calls or signs could become familiar. Imitation could help actions spread before words explained them. Over long time, these forms may have supported more stable meanings, more teaching, and more cooperation. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans was therefore not only a story of bigger brains or better hands, it was also a story of signals becoming more precise, more shared, and more useful across the group. Once communication could hold more detail, memory could travel farther. One individual's fear could become a group's caution. One individual's discovery could become another's knowledge. One caregiver's call could guide a child before the child understood the reason. This was not yet history, but it was a step toward history, because history begins when experience can be carried beyond the private body. Before writing, before myths, before names for ancestors, there may have been voices beside fire, voices during movement, voices near children, voices in danger, voices that did not yet tell stories as we know them, but still helped a group remain together. These early voices were not the final form of language. They were part of a long transition where sound, gesture, memory, and social life slowly gathered. Modern humans would eventually become creatures who speak about the past and wonder about their origin. But before that, our ancestors had to become creatures who could make another body look, listen, wait, come closer, move away, or remember. Communication became more valuable when it could carry experience from one body to another. A single individual could learn where water remained after dry days, which plants were useful, where predators often moved, or how a sharp edge could be made from stone. But if that knowledge stayed trapped inside one life, it disappeared when that life ended. In the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans, one of the deepest changes was that experience became increasingly shareable. A sound, a gesture, a look, a repeated movement, or a guiding action could help another individual avoid a danger it had never met before, or find a resource it had not discovered on its own. This was not yet teaching in the modern classroom sense. It did not require written symbols, spoken explanations, or a clear idea of the past, but it was still a way for memory to move. A caregiver could guide a child away from danger. An older individual could lead others toward water. One member of a group could react to the sign of a predator, and the fear could spread before the predator was seen by all. In that simple transfer, the group became wiser than one body alone. For ancestors moving through changing landscapes, this mattered because the world held too much for each individual to learn from direct experience. Some mistakes could not be repeated safely. Eating the wrong thing, stepping too close to a dangerous animal, sleeping in an exposed place, or missing the last reliable water source in a dry season could carry a heavy cost. Communication helped reduce the need for everybody to learn only through injury, hunger, or fear. It allowed one experience to become a warning, one discovery to become a shared route, one useful action to become a pattern others could copy. This is closely tied to the origin of modern humans, because our species would later become deeply dependent on inherited knowledge. But the beginning was quieter. It was in the child, watching the hand of an adult. It was in a group turning together toward an alarm. It was in a call that meant movement, danger, closeness, or attention. It was in the repeated connection between signal and result. Tools made this sharing even more important. A stone tool is not only an object, it is also a behavior that can be learned. One hand strikes, another hand watches. The younger body notices the grip, the angle, the patience, the moment when the sharp flake breaks away. Without complex speech, imitation can still carry knowledge. With clearer sounds and gestures, that knowledge can become easier to guide. An experienced individual might draw attention to the right stone, the right movement, the mistake that breaks the edge poorly, or the safer way to hold a sharp piece. We should be careful not to imagine full modern instruction too early. But we can understand that communication and tool learning would have reinforced each other. The more useful the skill, the more valuable it was to pass it on. The more a group could pass on useful skills, the more its young could begin life with more than their own trial and error. Information about food also mattered. A group living in mixed environments had to recognize many kinds of resources. Some plants were seasonal, some were hidden underground, some required processing, some animal remains could be useful if reached in time, some places were worth returning to. Communication could help connect bodies to these opportunities. It could guide attention toward a fruiting tree, a carcass, a nest, a shell bed, a waterhole, or a safe path through difficult ground. Not every signal needed to be precise. Even simple shared attention could change behavior. When several minds turn toward the same object, learning becomes easier. A child sees what adults choose. A younger individual sees what is avoided. A group remembers not only through each brain, but through repeated shared action. This slow movement from private experience to shared knowledge is one of the calm foundations of human evolution. Modern humans would later speak about absent places, future plans, old dangers, dead relatives, and imagined worlds. But before such complexity, communication had to serve immediate life. It helped bodies stay together, move together, feed young, copy skills, and avoid known risks. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, the voice did not begin as a tool for telling grand stories. It began closer to survival, a way to make another living body notice what mattered before it was too late. When memory could be shared, a group became more than several bodies surviving side by side. It became a living container for experience. One individual might remember a dry season water source, another might know where stone broke cleanly, another might recognize the movement of a dangerous animal, another might carry the habit of calming a child or preparing food in a certain way. Alone, each memory was fragile. It could vanish with injury, age, distance, or death. But when memory moved through sound, gesture, imitation, and repeated action, it became less easily lost. This was one of the quiet changes on the long path from ancient ancestors to modern humans. A group could begin to live not only by what each individual had personally learned, but by what others had learned before them. The young did not need to discover everything from the beginning. They could watch hands that already knew a movement. They could follow feet that already knew a route. They could respond to fear in older faces before they understood the full danger. In this way, shared memory softened the cost of being new in a hard world. It did not make life safe, but it made life slightly less blind. This is a deep foundation of human evolution. Because modern humans are not only biological beings, we are also inherited learners. Much of what we know is not discovered alone. It is received, copied, corrected, and passed on. That pattern did not begin with writing or formal teaching. Its roots likely reach back into older social lives, where useful behavior could continue because others saw it, repeated it, and kept it alive. A stone tool tradition, even a simple one, is already more than one clever act. It is a repeated relationship between hands, material, attention, and memory. A path used by a group is more than movement across land. It is remembered space. A warning signal is more than sound. It is fear made shareable. A child learning what to eat is not only feeding, it is entering a chain of survival older than itself. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans slowly became a path where experience could accumulate, not perfectly, not permanently, and not in the modern sense of culture with stories, laws, or written knowledge, but enough for a group to carry practical wisdom across time. This would have mattered, especially because the world kept changing. If environments had been simple and unchanging, each generation might have needed less flexible learning. But climates shifted, food sources moved, animals migrated, water appeared and disappeared. Groups entered new places. Old habits sometimes failed. A shared memory system allowed a group to hold more possibilities. If one method did not work, another remembered action might. If one person had seen a danger, others could become cautious. If one route had failed, another might be tried. Here, communication, memory, tool use, and social life begin to join. None of them alone created modern humanity. Together, over deep time, they shaped a creature increasingly dependent on learning from others. This dependence was powerful, but it also made humans vulnerable in a new way. A group that lost its elders, lost its roots, lost its tool habits, or scattered too widely could lose more than bodies. It could lose knowledge. The human story grew by preserving memory, but memory always needed living carriers. Before writing, memory had to live in bodies, in voices, gestures, eyes, hands, walking patterns, and shared routines. This gives the origin of modern humans a quieter and more humble meaning. We did not become human only because our brains grew larger. We became human because brains, bodies, groups, and landscapes began to hold experience together. The mind of one individual was important, but the life of the group became a larger mind of sorts. Not mystical, not perfect, simply practical. It remembered where to go, what to fear, what to touch, what to leave, how to make, how to wait, and how to stay near. Much later, modern humans would turn shared memory into spoken histories, myths, teaching, names, rituals, and finally written records. But the earliest foundation was karma, one life helping another life not begin from nothing. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, This may be one of the most important changes of all. Experience stopped ending completely with the individual. It began to travel. And once memory could travel, the human story could grow longer than any single human life. Modern humans did not appear as if a door opened and all earlier life stood on one side, while humanity stood on the other. The change was slower, less tidy, and more difficult to draw with a single line. Fossils, stone tools, ancient landscapes, and genetic evidence all suggest a branching story, not a simple replacement of one form by another in a clean sequence. Long before the world was inhabited only by Homo sapiens, different human relatives lived, moved, adapted, and disappeared in different places and at different times. Some were older members of the human family, some were closer to us. Some overlapped with early modern humans. This means that becoming modern was not a sudden announcement in nature. No generation woke up and knew it had crossed into a new category. Bodies changed gradually. Behaviors changed gradually. Groups moved, separated, met, and sometimes mixed. A skull might become more rounded over time. A face might become smaller. Tools might become more varied. Social learning might deepen. Symbolic behavior would later become clearer in the archaeological record. But none of these things formed a single bright border where ancient ancestors ended and modern humans began. The long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans is more truthful when it is seen as a widening pattern of change, with many lives continuing side by side, rather than a straight line climbing toward us. Homo sapiens arose in Africa, but even that statement should be held with care. It does not mean one small group suddenly became fully modern in every way. It means that within African populations, over long periods, traits associated with our species gradually appeared and were carried forward. Early Homo sapiens were not modern city people placed in old landscapes. They were hunter-gatherers with bodies much like ours, but living within the pressures of their own time: food, water, weather, childbirth, injury, group life, memory, movement, and risk. Their minds were human, yet their world was not ours. They had no writing, no agriculture, no permanent cities, and no knowledge that their descendants would one day speak of evolution. They were not practicing for history. They were living inside it without knowing it. Outside Africa, and sometimes within broader regions of human movement, other human relatives also existed. Neanderthals lived across parts of Europe and Western Asia for a long time. Denisovans are known especially through ancient DNA and limited fossil evidence, reminding us that some parts of the human family are still only partly visible. Other earlier human forms had their own histories. These relatives were not monsters, failures, or simple stepping stones. They were human relatives adapted to their own worlds, with bodies, tools, survival strategies, and social lives of their own. Some evidence shows that early modern humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans, which means our story includes encounter and inheritance, not only disappearance. Many people alive today carry small amounts of DNA from these ancient relatives. That fact quietly changes the meaning of becoming modern. It tells us that the path to modern humanity was not only a story of separation, it was also a story of contact. In a calm evolution story, this should make us more humble. The modern human did not rise alone from a clean road. Our origin passed through a world where several kinds of humans, or human relatives, could exist at the same time. Some met, some avoided one another. Some vanished before leaving much evidence. Some left traces inside us. Yet we should not pretend to know every detail of those meetings. The archaeological record is uneven. Ancient DNA survives only under certain conditions. Fossils are rare compared with the number of lives once lived. What we have are fragments, and from those fragments, a careful picture emerges. Becoming modern was a process, not a single event. The title of this journey, From Ancient Ancestors to Modern Humans, does not point to one clean transformation. It points to a long and branching inheritance in which the creature we call human slowly became recognizable while still standing among other relatives, other possibilities, and other lost futures. To be modern, in this deep sense, was not to step outside ancestry. It was to carry ancestry forward in a new form, without knowing that the old world was beginning to change around us. The movement from ancient ancestors to modern humans was not a straight line across a map, or a clean sequence of one body replacing another. It was slower, more uneven, and more tangled. Bodies changed, but not all parts changed together. Behavior changed, but not everywhere at the same pace. Groups moved, but not as one single wave with one single purpose. What we call becoming modern was really a long pattern of populations living in different places, facing different climates, carrying different habits, and sometimes meeting other human relatives along the way. A skull shape could become more like ours while tools remained simple. A group could use complex tools without leaving behind every sign of symbolic life. A population could move into a new region and then retreat, disappear, mix with others, or leave only faint traces. The evidence we have does not show a ladder, it shows a living network. This matters because modern humans often want ancestry to feel like a journey with a clear road. First this species, then that species, then us. But evolution rarely works that neatly. A trait may appear in one population and not another. A useful behavior may spread, be lost, or change. A group may survive for thousands of years in one environment and then become vulnerable when the climate shifts. Early Homo sapiens, like the human relatives around them, lived inside these pressures. They did not move because they knew they were expanding human history. They followed food, water, seasons, coastlines, rivers, animals, safety, opportunity, and sometimes necessity. Some movements were small and local. Others, over many generations, carried people far beyond the places where their ancestors had lived. Migration was not a heroic march. It was often the sum of ordinary decisions: where to camp, where to search, where the old place no longer gave enough, where young could be kept alive, where weather and food allowed the group to continue. As modern humans spread, they met landscapes that asked new things of the body and mind. Deserts, forests, grasslands, mabotins, cold regions, coastlines, and river valleys each offered different problems. Clothing, shelter, fire use, tool choices, food habits, and social memory all mattered in different ways. The same human body had to become flexible through behavior, not only through bone. This is one reason culture became so important. Culture, in this early sense, does not need to mean writing, monuments, or settled civilization. It can mean learned ways of making tools, preparing food, using fire, sharing knowledge, moving through land, caring for children, and remembering what a place demands. Biology gave human beings a body. Culture helped that body live in many worlds. Yet even culture did not unfold in one simple direction. Some tools became more refined. Some materials were used in new ways. Some groups left signs of ornaments, pigments, burials, or symbolic behavior, while other traces are missing or uncertain. We have to be careful not to make every absence into proof that nothing existed. Organic materials decay, small camps vanish, shorelines move. Many lives leave no durable mark. The story must stay honest by saying both what the evidence suggests and what it cannot fully show. From ancient ancestors to modern humans, the change was real, but it was never a single clean transformation. It was body, behavior, movement, learning, and environment shaping one another across deep time. Modern humans became recognizable not because one generation suddenly stepped into a new identity, but because many generations slowly carried forward a flexible way of living. They could learn from others, adjust to new places, remember old dangers, use materials, care for dependent young, and build shared habits strong enough to travel. But they still remained vulnerable animals inside nature. Their modernity did not free them from hunger, cold, illness, loss, or uncertainty. It only gave them more ways to respond. And in that uneven response, moving across changing lands without knowing the future, the human story continued to widen. From ancient ancestors to Homo sapiens, The human story is best understood not as a single road, but as a wide network of lives crossing deep time. Some branches continued, some ended. Some met others and left traces. Some disappeared so completely that only a tooth, a fragment of bone, a tool, or a faint genetic signal remains. This is why the calm story of evolution should not be told as if every earlier human relative existed only to become us. They had their own worlds, their own ways of moving, eating, enduring cold or heat, raising young, and surviving as long as their conditions allowed. Australopithecines, early members of the genus Homo, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other known or partly known relatives, belong to a branching family, not a straight parade. Homo sapiens is the branch from which we speak now, but we are not the only branch that ever mattered. The deeper truth is more humble. Modern humans are the living continuation of a history filled with lost possibilities. Adaptation shaped that history, but adaptation was never perfect. A body suited to one place could struggle in another. A tool tradition useful for one kind of food might not solve a new problem. A population that endured for thousands of years could become vulnerable when climate changed, when resources shifted, when numbers became small, or when other groups entered the same landscape. Loss was part of the story. Entire human relatives vanished, not necessarily because they were simple or failed in a moral sense, but because survival depends on many fragile conditions at once. A group needs enough children to live, enough food to continue, enough social knowledge to pass on, enough space to move, and enough luck to survive events it cannot control. When those conditions fail, even a capable lineage can fade. The path to modern humans was therefore not a victory march. It was a survival of one branch through a world where many branches did not last. Encounter also shaped the story. Genetic evidence shows that Homo sapiens did not move through an empty world. Some modern human populations carry small inherited traces from Neanderthals, and some carry traces from Denisovans. These traces do not turn the story into a simple tale of mixing everywhere, but they do show that contact happened in some places and times. There were meetings between different human groups or relatives, and those meetings became part of our biological inheritance. This makes the origin of modern humans less isolated. We did not become ourselves by standing apart from every other form of humanity. We became ourselves in a world where related humans had already adapted, moved, learned, and endured before us. Some of their story is still inside living people. Much of it is lost beyond recovery. Continuity is the quiet thread that remains. The hands that shaped stone were not entirely new. They carried older primate abilities into new patterns. The feet that crossed landscapes carried the long history of upright movement. The mind that remembered water, danger, faces, tools, and seasons grew from older forms of attention. The voice that would later become language came from bodies already signaling, calling, caring, warning, and gathering attention. Homo sapiens did not appear from nothing. Our species gathered many older inheritances into a flexible way of life, a body able to travel, hands able to make, a brain able to learn deeply, children able to absorb knowledge for years, and groups able to carry memory beyond one life. Yet even early Homo sapiens remained vulnerable. They still needed food, warmth, care, shelter, rest, and one another. To become modern was not to become separate from nature. It was to carry a longer memory of nature inside the body and the group. In that sense, the journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans is not only about what changed, it is also about what continued: hunger, fear, care, learning, dependence, movement, and the need to survive one more day. The modern human stands at the end of this part of the story, not as a final answer, but as a living mixture of adaptation, loss, encounter, and inheritance. To look back at human evolution is not to look down on the past. It is to loosen the idea that modern humans stand outside the living world. We often speak as if civilization made us separate from animals, separate from weather, separate from hunger, separate from the old needs of the body. But the long journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans tells a quieter truth. We are not visitors placed above nature. We are nature remembering itself through one unusual branch of life. The bones, muscles, hands, eyes, breath, fear, care, hunger, sleep, and need for others that shaped our ancestors are still present in us. They have been covered by houses, language, machines, cities, laws, and written history, but they have not disappeared. A modern person sitting in a room at night still carries a body that needs warmth, rest, safety, food, and familiar voices. A child still needs care for many years. A tired mind still becomes calmer when danger feels far away. A lonely body still searches for belonging. These are not weaknesses left over from a primitive past. They are reminders that the human story began inside dependency, not above it. Our ancestors survived because bodies learned to live with other bodies, because memory helped them return to water, because hands learned from materials, because groups carried experience, because children were protected long enough to learn. When we remember this, the story of evolution becomes less proud but more meaningful. Modern humans are not the opposite of ancient ancestors. We are their continuation, changed by time, but still carrying the deep shape of their needs. This view also changes how we understand intelligence. Intelligence is often imagined as the thing that lifted humans away from nature, but in the older story, intelligence grew because nature was difficult. The mind became useful because the world had to be read carefully. A path had to be remembered, a storm had to be endured, a face had to be recognized, a tool had to be shaped, a child had to be taught without always using words. A group had to move when the old place no longer gave enough. Human intelligence was not born as pure thought, it was born as adjustment. It was the ability to answer changing conditions with memory, patience, imitation, and cooperation. Even today, the most human parts of us are still tied to those old patterns. We plan because earlier lives had to prepare. We teach because earlier lives learned by watching. We speak because earlier bodies had to signal, warn, comfort, and guide attention. We build because hands once learned that stone, wood, bone, fire, and shelter could help the body survive. The path from ancient ancestors to modern humans is therefore not only a story of becoming more complex, it is a story of remaining connected. Every modern ability has roots in older necessities. Every abstract thought rests on a living body. Every culture rests on food, sleep, childhood, memory, and trust. This does not make humans less remarkable. It makes our remarkableness more honest. We became unusual not because we escaped the animal world, but because we carried parts of it into new forms. We turned attention into knowledge, memory into teaching, sound into language, care into community, and survival into meaning. Yet the old foundation remains. When modern humans ask where they came from, the answer does not begin with monuments or writing. It begins with ancient bodies moving through uncertain land, trying to keep young alive, trying to stay warm, trying to remember where life might continue. To understand that origin is to become gentler with ourselves. It reminds us that fear, fatigue, closeness, curiosity, and the need for rest are not accidents. They are part of the long inheritance that allowed the human story to last long enough to be told. The educational value of the human evolution story is not that modern humans are the highest point of life. That would be too simple and not fully honest. Every living species has its own long inheritance, its own way of fitting into the world, its own line of survivors behind it. A bird, a tree, an insect, a whale, a fungus, and a human being are all results of time, not mistakes waiting to become something else. What makes our story important to us is that we are the branch able to ask about it. We can look back toward ancient ancestors and understand that our lives were made possible by countless fragile continuations. A child survived, a group endured, a body found enough food, a mother carried, a hand learned, a memory was shared. A dangerous night passed. A small population remained long enough for another generation to begin. When seen this way, evolution teaches humility. It shows that life is not guaranteed. Intelligence is not separate from need. and no generation carries the whole story alone. Modern humans became modern through dependence, as much as invention. The body depended on food, water, warmth, sleep, and care. The mind depended on memory, attention, teaching, and the presence of others. Groups depended on landscapes, animals, plants, seasons, fire, stone, and shelter. Nothing in the human story grew alone. This is a useful lesson for a modern listener, because modern life often teaches the opposite. It often praises speed, independence, control, and constant improvement. But our origin tells us that survival was usually quieter than that. It came from noticing small things, adapting when conditions changed, staying close enough to learn, and preserving what helped the young live. The ancient world did not reward pride. It rewarded workable relationships between body and land, between parent and child, between hand and material, between memory and danger, between one person and another. The journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans reminds us that learning itself is an ancient form of survival. No human being begins from nothing. Each person receives language, care, gestures, food habits, warnings, stories, names, skills, and ways of seeing the world from others. This pattern is older than schools and older than writing. It reaches back to the time when a young body learned by watching an older hand, when a safe path was followed before it was understood, when a warning sound carried another individual's fear into the group. To be human is to inherit. We inherit genes, but we also inherit attention, memory, methods, and meanings. That inheritance gives us responsibility. If our ancestors survived by passing forward what helped life continue, then modern humans have the same task in a wider and more conscious form. We can choose what we pass on. We can pass on fear without understanding, or we can pass on patience. We can pass on carelessness toward the living world, or we can pass on respect for the systems that still support us. We can treat the human body as a machine that should never tire, or we can remember that rest, sleep, warmth, and safety are not laziness, but ancient biological needs. We can treat loneliness as a personal failure, or we can remember that the human mind was shaped for connection long before civilization gave that connection names. This is where the calm story of evolution becomes useful, not only interesting. It helps us see that human beings are not made only by competition. We are also made by care, teaching, cooperation, memory, and shared vulnerability. None of these things were perfect in the past, and they are not perfect now, but they were powerful enough to keep the story alive. The lesson is not that we should return to ancient life. That would be impossible and unnecessary. The lesson is that modern life still rests on ancient foundations. A person can use technology, live in a city, speak many words, and still need the same deep things: a safe place to rest, enough nourishment, trusted relationships, time to learn, and a sense that life is not being faced entirely alone. Human evolution does not give us a simple answer about what we should become. It gives us a quieter reminder of what made becoming possible. When we reach the end of this calm evolution story, nothing in it should feel like a closed door. The journey from ancient ancestors to modern humans does not end because the questions are finished. It only reaches the place from which we are able to ask them. For millions of years, life moved without knowing it was becoming a memory. Bodies changed. Children were born. Some survived, some did not. Groups crossed land, followed water, watched danger, learned from one another, and vanished into time without leaving a name. Ancient ancestors did not know they were carrying the early materials of the human future. Early Homo sapiens did not know they would one day be called modern humans. No one inside the story could see the whole story. That is what makes the human origin both humbling and strangely tender. We are able to look back only because countless lives that could not look forward continued long enough for us to exist. The bones, tools, traces of fire, footprints, shelters, and genetic fragments that remain are not just evidence. They are reminders of lives that were real, limited, vulnerable, and unfinished. They remind us that modern humanity was not created by one gift, one invention, one species, or one moment of awakening. It grew from many quiet forms of dependence, the body depending on food, the child depending on care, the group depending on memory, the hand depending on material, the mind depending on others, and all of them depending on a living world that never promised safety. This is why these stories should not end with pride alone. It should end with attention. If we understand that humans came from a long chain of adaptation, then we can see modern life more clearly. Our intelligence is powerful, but it still rests on sleep, nourishment, warmth, trust, and learning. Our cultures are vast, but they still depend on children being cared for and knowledge being passed on. Our technologies are astonishing, but they still use hands, eyes, memory, cooperation, and materials from the earth. Our questions reach far beyond the ancient world, but the body asking them is still an ancient inheritance. To know this is not to make life smaller, it is to make it more connected. Every breath belongs to a history older than speech. Every act of teaching continues a pattern older than writing. Every moment of care echoes the long dependence that helped human beings survive before they knew what humanity was. The educational value of evolution is not simply that we learn where we came from, it is that we learn to hold our place with more honesty. We are not separate from other life, and we are not untouched by the past. We are a continuation of it, capable now of choosing how we live with that knowledge. The ancient world shaped us without intention, but modern humans have something our distant ancestors did not have in the same way: the ability to reflect, to remember on purpose, to study evidence, to correct false stories, and to ask what kind of future our inherited minds and hands should serve. This does not give us a simple answer. Evolution never promised one. It leaves us with a quieter responsibility. If our species was formed by care, learning, adaptation, and shared vulnerability, then perhaps the most useful thing we can carry forward is not the belief that we have conquered nature, but the understanding that we still belong to it. And if no ancestor ever knew they were becoming human, then now that we can finally look back, what kind of human story are we choosing to continue?